Welcome to another episode of the English Talk community. I'm Julia, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you here today. If you're new to our community, we're all about helping you improve your English through real-life stories and practical tips. Every week, we bring you engaging content designed to boost your confidence in listening and speaking. So, if you enjoy this episode, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us reach more learners like you. Have you ever been in a situation where a conversation was moving too fast and you didn't know how to jump in? Or maybe you were in a meeting where everyone seemed to understand each other perfectly, but you felt lost. If that sounds familiar, don't worry, you're not alone. Many English learners face this challenge, and today, we're going to tackle it together. To start, let's talk about Sarah. Sarah is a marketing manager at a tech company, and she often travels for work. Last year, she had a business trip to London where she attended a major conference. During a networking session, she met a group of professionals discussing their latest projects. Excited to join the conversation, she quickly realized something: keeping up with the fast-paced discussion was harder than she expected. Even though Sarah knew many of the words being used, the speed and flow of the conversation made it difficult for her to process everything in real time. She felt frustrated, thinking, "Why is this so hard? I understand English, but I can't keep up." Has that ever happened to you? It's a common experience, but the good news is that there's a solution. After the conference, Sarah decided to change her approach. She started listening to natural, fast-paced English conversations, just like this podcast. She also began reading business articles and watching discussions in English. By exposing herself to real-world conversations, she trained her brain to recognize patterns and process speech more quickly. A few months later, Sarah noticed a huge improvement. She attended another conference, and this time, she was able to follow along and even contribute to discussions with confidence. She no longer felt like an outsider. Instead, she was an active participant. And that's exactly what we want for you, too. Think about a time when you struggled to keep up in a conversation. Maybe you were with friends, classmates, or colleagues, and the discussion moved so fast that you didn't know when to speak. It can be discouraging, but just like Sarah, you can train yourself to improve. The key is practice and exposure to real conversations. One simple technique you can use is shadowing. This means listening to a native speaker and repeating what they say as closely as possible. You don't need to understand every word. Just focus on the rhythm and speed. This will help you get used to the natural flow of English and improve your ability to respond quickly. Another great tip is to listen to English podcasts or videos with subtitles first, then listen again without them. This helps your brain get used to understanding spoken English without relying on text. The more you practice, the easier it will become. So if you've ever felt lost in a conversation, remember, this is just a temporary challenge. With the right strategies, you can train your ears and your brain to process English more effectively. And in the next part of this episode, we'll explore another common challenge and how to overcome it. Stay with me. Now let's talk about another challenge many English learners face: speaking with confidence. Even if you understand English, well, expressing your thoughts clearly can feel overwhelming. Have you ever hesitated to speak because you were afraid of making mistakes? If so, you're not alone. Many learners experience this fear, but the good news is that confidence is a skill that can be developed. Let me share a story about David. David is a software developer, and part of his job requires explaining complex ideas to his team. One day, he had to present a new software feature during a meeting. He knew exactly what he wanted to say, but as soon as he started speaking, he felt nervous. What if his colleagues didn't understand him? What if he forgot the right words? These doubts made him hesitate, and his explanation didn't come out as clearly as he had hoped. After the meeting, David realized that he needed a new approach. Instead of worrying about perfection, he focused on preparation. Before his next presentation, he practiced explaining the feature out loud several times. He used simple language and structured his thoughts in a clear way. Most importantly, he reminded himself that it was okay to make small mistakes. What really mattered was communication. The result? During his next meeting, David felt much more confident. He was able to explain the concept clearly, answer questions from his colleagues, and even enjoy the discussion. He realized that confidence doesn't come from knowing every Single word. It comes from practice and preparation. Have you ever felt like David? Maybe you needed to introduce yourself in a group, give a presentation, or simply share your thoughts in English, but nerves held you back. If so, here's an important mindset shift. Fluent speakers are not people who never make mistakes. They are people who keep going despite their mistakes. One simple way to boost your confidence is by practicing thinking in English. Instead of translating from your native language, try to form thoughts directly in English. For example, describe what you're doing in your head. I'm making coffee. I need to send an email. This small habit trains your brain to process English more naturally. Another effective strategy is to practice speaking alone. It may sound strange, but talking to yourself in English is a powerful way to build confidence. You can describe your day, talk about your plans, or even pretend you're explaining something to a friend. The more you speak, the more comfortable you'll feel. And remember, mistakes are part of the process. Instead of feeling embarrassed, view them as learning opportunities. The more you practice, the more natural speaking English will become. So, whether you're preparing for a meeting, a conversation with friends, or just trying to improve your speaking skills, keep this in mind. Confidence is not about being perfect. It's about being willing to try. And in the next part of this episode, we'll discuss another key skill that will take your English to the next level. Stay tuned. Now, let's talk about something that can transform the way you communicate in English. Understanding common conversation patterns. Have you ever noticed how native speakers seem to flow effortlessly from one idea to the next? It's not just about knowing vocabulary. It's about recognizing the natural rhythm of conversations. Take Mark, for example. Mark is a teacher, and his job requires him to explain things clearly to students from different backgrounds. One day, he had a class with students from various countries, all at different levels of English. Some of them understood everything quickly, while others struggled to keep up. Mark realized that if he wanted all his students to follow along, he needed to adjust the way he spoke. Instead of using complex sentences, Mark started breaking his explanations into smaller, clearer parts. He also paid attention to common phrases that make conversations smoother, such as, "let me explain," for example, and "does that make sense?" These small phrases helped his students follow along more easily and made his lessons feel more natural. You've probably heard these kinds of phrases in real conversations too. Native speakers use them all the time to organize their thoughts and keep conversations flowing. If you start paying attention, you'll notice patterns like, when asking for clarification, "Could you repeat that?" "Can you give me an example?" When expressing your opinion, "I think that." "In my experience." When transitioning between ideas, "By the way, that reminds me." Learning these common expressions can make a big difference in your ability to follow and participate in conversations. Instead of struggling to find the right words, you'll already have useful phrases ready to go. A great way to practice is by listening to conversations and writing down phrases that come up often. You can also try using these phrases in your own conversations, even if it's just by repeating them to yourself. The more you practice, the more natural they will feel. Another helpful exercise is sentence completion. Take a phrase like, "let me give you an example," and challenge yourself to complete it with your own sentence. For instance, let me give you an example. Yesterday, I had a conversation with my coworker about. This helps you get comfortable using these phrases in real situations. At first, it may feel unnatural, but over time, these expressions will become part of your active vocabulary. And when that happens, you'll notice that your conversations flow much more smoothly. So, if you've ever struggled with keeping up in conversations, don't just focus on individual words. Start paying attention to how people structure their sentences. In the next part of this episode, we'll look at another essential skill that will take your English even further. Now, let's talk about one of the biggest challenges English learners face: understanding fast speech. Have you ever listened to a native speaker and thought, "They're speaking too fast. I can't catch every word"? If so, don't worry, you're not alone. Many learners struggle with this, but the good news is that there are strategies to help you get better. Let's look at the story of Anna. Anna is a nurse, and she recently moved to an English-speaking country for work. She felt confident in her reading and writing skills, but listening was a different story. At work, her colleagues spoke quickly, using contractions and connected speech. She could understand some words, but often she missed key details and had to ask people to repeat themselves. It made her feel frustrated and self-conscious. Instead of giving up, Anna decided to focus on improving her listening skills. She started by listening to English at a slightly faster speed than she was comfortable with. She used podcasts, audiobooks, and videos, gradually increasing the speed over time. This helped her train her brain to process spoken English more quickly. Another thing that helped Anna was practicing with connected speech. In natural English, words often blend together. For example, instead of saying, "What do you want to do?" slowly, native speakers might say, "What do you want to do?" This can be confusing at first, but once you recognize these patterns, it becomes much easier to understand fast speech. To improve in this area, Anna started repeating short phrases she heard in conversations. She paid attention to how words were linked and practiced, saying them the same way. Over time, this made a huge difference, not only in her listening skills but also in her ability to speak more naturally. If you want to train your ears for fast English, here's a great exercise. Listen to a short sentence and write down what you hear. Then, check the transcript to see if you got it right. This will help you recognize common reductions and connected speech patterns. Another great technique is listening in layers. First, listen for the general meaning of a conversation without trying to catch every word. Then, listen again and focus on specific details. Finally, listen one more time and try to notice pronunciation patterns. By doing this, you'll improve your ability to process spoken English naturally, and don't be discouraged if you don't catch every word. Even native speakers don't hear everything perfectly. They rely on context to fill in missing details. So instead of trying to understand every single word, focus on the overall message. With practice, listening to fast English will become easier, just like it did for Anna. And in the next part of this episode, we'll talk about another key skill that will help you become even more confident in English. Now let's focus on a skill that can completely change how you communicate: learning to think in English. Have you ever noticed that when you try to speak, your brain starts translating from your native language? This can slow you down and make conversations feel unnatural. But the good news is, you can train yourself to think directly in English. Let's talk about Lucas. Lucas is an engineer who studied English for years, but every time he tried to speak, he hesitated. He would first think of a sentence in his native language, then translate it in his head before saying it out loud. This process took time, and by the time he was ready to speak, the conversation had already moved on. One day, Lucas decided to change his approach. Instead of translating, he started practicing thinking in English throughout his day. When he woke up, he described his morning routine in English. "I'm brushing my teeth. I'm making coffee." When he walked to work, he looked at things around him and named them in English. "That's a red car. The sky is cloudy today." At first, it felt strange, but with time, this habit became natural. After a few months, Lucas noticed that when he spoke, words came to him more easily. His sentences flowed more naturally because he wasn't stopping to translate. If you want to train your brain to think in English, here's a simple exercise. Set a timer for 5 minutes and describe everything you see around you in English. It doesn't have to be perfect. The goal is to get used to forming thoughts directly in English without switching back to your native language. Another great technique is storytelling. Take a memory from your life and try to narrate it in English, as if you were telling a friend. Start with simple sentences and add details as you get more comfortable. The more you do this, the easier it will become to express yourself without hesitation. It's also helpful to surround yourself with English as much as possible. Listen to English podcasts, read English articles, and even change the language settings on your phone. The more your brain is exposed to English, the more naturally it will start processing information in English. And don't worry about making mistakes. The goal is not to be perfect. It's to train your brain to think faster in English. Over time, you'll notice that your speech becomes smoother, and you'll feel more confident in conversations. So if translating in your head has been slowing you down, try these techniques. The more you practice thinking in English, the more fluent you'll become. And in the next part of this episode, we'll we'll explore another powerful strategy to boost your communication skills. Now, let's talk about another powerful strategy for improving your English: expanding your vocabulary naturally. Many learners think they need to memorize long lists of words, but there's a better way: learning vocabulary in context. Let's look at Emma's experience. Emma is a graphic designer who wanted to improve her English for work. At first, she tried memorizing new words from a dictionary, but when it came time to use them in conversations, she couldn't remember them. The words felt disconnected, and she didn't know how to use them naturally. Then Emma changed her method. Instead of memorizing isolated words, she started learning phrases and expressions that people actually use in real life. For example, instead of just learning the word deadline, she learned sentences like, "I have to meet a deadline and the deadline is coming up soon." This helped her understand how the word was used in different situations. Another thing that helped Emma was noticing new words in context. She started watching TV shows and reading articles in English, paying attention to how native speakers used certain phrases. Whenever she found a useful expression, she wrote it down and tried using it in her own sentences. If you want to expand your vocabulary naturally, here's a great tip: focus on word combinations instead of single words. Learn how words are commonly used together, such as make a decision instead of just decision, take a break instead of just break, give someone advice instead of just advice. By learning words in chunks, you'll sound more natural and remember them more easily. Another fun technique is creating mental images. If you learn the phrase break the ice, which means to start a conversation in a friendly way, imagine someone literally breaking ice before talking. This makes new vocabulary more memorable. It's also important to use new words as soon as possible. When you learn a new phrase, try using it in a sentence right away. You can even write a short story using the phrase or say it out loud in a conversation with yourself. The more you use a word, the more natural it becomes. And don't stress about learning too many words at once. Even if you learn just 1 or 2 new phrases a day, that's over 700 new expressions in a year. Small daily improvements will make a big difference in your fluency. So, if you want to improve your vocabulary, don't just memorize words. Learn them in context, pay attention to how native speakers use them, and practice using them yourself. And in the next part of this episode, we'll explore another technique that will help you take your English to the next level. Now let's explore another key strategy that will boost your confidence in English: shadowing. This is a powerful technique that helps you improve pronunciation, rhythm, and fluency by mimicking native speakers. Meet Daniel. Daniel is an architect who often needs to present his ideas in English. However, he always felt that his speech was too slow and unnatural. He knew the right words, but when he spoke, he sounded hesitant. That's when he discovered shadowing. Shadowing is simple but highly effective. You listen to a native speaker and repeat what they say immediately, trying to copy their pronunciation and intonation as closely as possible. Daniel started practicing this every day with short podcast clips and movie dialogues. At first, it was difficult to keep up, but over time, he noticed that his speech became smoother and more natural. One of the best ways to do shadowing is by choosing a short audio clip, about 10-20 seconds long, and listening to it multiple times. First, just listen carefully. Then, play it again and repeat the words at the same time as the speaker. Don't worry if you miss some words, just focus on the flow of the speech. Another great way to practice is with subtitles. You can watch a short video with English subtitles, repeat what the speaker says, and then try it without looking at the text. This helps train your ear and improves your ability to speak quickly and naturally. A common mistake learners make is focusing too much on individual words instead of the rhythm of the sentence. In English, some words are stressed more than others, and this gives the language its natural flow. Pay attention to which words are emphasized and try to mimic that pattern. For example, in the sentence, "I can't believe you did that." The emphasis is usually on can't, believe, and did. If you practice shadowing, you'll start noticing these patterns and using them in your own speech. At first, shadowing might feel uncomfortable, but consistency is key. Even just 5 minutes a day can make a huge difference in how natural your English sounds. And the best part? You don't need a teacher. You can practice anytime, anywhere. So, if you want to improve your pronunciation and fluency, start shadowing today. Pick a short audio clip, repeat what you hear, and keep practicing. Over time, you'll notice a big improvement in how confidently and smoothly you speak. In the next part of this episode, we'll explore another technique that will make your English learning journey even more effective. Now, let's talk about a common problem many English learners face: finding the right words in conversations. Have you ever had a great idea in your head but struggled to say it out loud? Maybe you searched for the right words, but they just wouldn't come fast enough. This is frustrating, but don't worry. It's something you can improve with practice. Let's take the story of Maria. Maria is a university student studying international business. She understands English well, and when she writes, she feels confident. But in conversations, she often pauses too much, trying to remember words. This made her feel nervous, and she sometimes avoided speaking altogether. One day, Maria's professor gave her a great tip: practice speaking in low-pressure situations. Instead of waiting for big presentations or group discussions, Maria started practicing speaking English alone. She described her daily activities, talked about her opinions out loud, and even spoke to herself in the mirror. Over time, she became more comfortable forming sentences quickly. She also started using synonyms when she forgot a word. For example, if she couldn't remember the word enormous, she would say really big. Instead of stopping the conversation, she kept going, and this made her sound more natural. Let's look at another example: Jake. Jake is an IT specialist who often participates in online meetings with international teams. He understands technical English well, but when it's his turn to speak, he feels pressure and sometimes freezes. One technique that helped him was preparing common phrases in advance. Before each meeting, Jake thought about the topics that might come up. He prepared simple sentences like, "I'd like to add something to that point. Let me clarify what I mean." One possible solution is, by practicing these phrases, Jake felt more prepared. And when he needed to speak in a meeting, his mind didn't go blank. He already had useful expressions ready to use. If you also struggle to find words in conversations, try these strategies. Practice speaking alone about your daily life and opinions. Use simpler words if you forget a specific term. Prepare key phrases in advance for common situations. The more you practice, the easier it will be to express yourself naturally. And in the next part of this episode, we'll explore another technique that will help you feel even more confident in your English. Now let's talk about one of the biggest fears English learners have: making mistakes while speaking. Many people hesitate to speak because they're afraid of saying something wrong. But here's the truth: mistakes are a natural part of learning, and the more you embrace them, the faster you'll improve. Let me introduce you to Diego. Diego is a financial odds analyst who recently moved to Canada for work. He had studied English for years, but when he arrived, he was afraid to speak. He worried about using incorrect grammar or mispronouncing words. Because of this, he often stayed silent in meetings and social situations. One day, Diego met Tom, a native English speaker who was learning Spanish. Tom spoke with confidence, even though he made mistakes. Diego noticed that people still understood him, and no one laughed at his errors. This made him realize that confidence is more important than perfection. After that, Diego changed his approach. Instead of aiming for perfect grammar, he focused on communicating his ideas clearly. He reminded himself that even native speakers make mistakes sometimes. With this mindset shift, he started speaking more often, and as a result, his English improved quickly. Now let's look at another example: Sophia. Sophia is a nurse who works in an international hospital. She was always worried about making mistakes when speaking with patients. Because of this, she spoke very slowly and carefully, which sometimes made her sound unnatural. One day, her supervisor gave her great advice: focus on getting your message across instead of being perfect. The goal of communication isn't to impress people with flawless English, it's to be understood. Sophia started practicing speaking without stopping to correct every little mistake. At first, it felt strange, but soon, she noticed something interesting. Her patients understood her just fine, even when she made minor errors. This gave her more confidence, and over time, her speech became smoother and more natural. If you also fear making mistakes, here's what you can do. Change your mindset. Mistakes are proof that you're learning. Every time you make an error, you're getting one step closer to fluency. Keep speaking, even if you're unsure about grammar or pronunciation. Say what you can. People will still understand you. Learn from your mistakes. Instead of feeling embarrassed, use errors as a learning tool. Notice them, correct them, and move on. The most fluent speakers aren't the ones who never make mistakes. They're the ones who keep talking despite them. The more you practice, the more confident you'll become. So, if you've been holding back because you're afraid of making mistakes, let this be your sign to start speaking more. The only real mistake is not trying. And in the next part of this episode, we'll explore another technique that will take your English to the next level. Now let's dive into a technique that many learners overlook: learning through storytelling. This method not only helps you practice your speaking skills, but also allows you to express yourself more creatively in English. Stories are powerful tools that help you connect with the language in a way that feels natural and engaging. Let me share a story about David. David is a photographer who travels around the world for work. Although he's fluent in reading and writing English, he found it difficult to speak confidently when telling stories about his travels. He noticed that his descriptions were often short and lacked detail. For example, instead of describing the beautiful landscapes he saw, he would simply say, "It was nice." David wanted to make his storytelling more engaging, so he decided to focus on improving his ability to tell stories in English. The first step was to break down a story into key details. He started practicing telling simple stories, focusing on the who, what, where, and when. For example, instead of saying, "I went to the beach," David learned to say, "Last summer, I visited a beautiful beach in California. It was in a small town called Malibu, and the weather was perfect. The water was crystal clear, and the sand was soft and golden. I spent the whole day there, taking pictures of the ocean." By practicing this method, David found that his storytelling in English became more vivid and engaging. He also noticed that his confidence increased because he wasn't just focusing on vocabulary, he was using real experiences and emotions to express himself. Let's look at another example. Emily, who works in marketing. Emily wanted to improve her speaking skills, but she found that the traditional methods of learning vocabulary and grammar were boring to her. She struggled to find a way to practice that felt more meaningful. One day, Emily decided to try a new approach: telling stories about her work. She started by picking a recent project she worked on and narrating the process in English. For example, for this marketing campaign, we had to target a new audience. First, we did research to understand their needs. Then, we created a message that would resonate with them. The launch was a huge success, and we saw an increase in engagement right away. The more Emily practiced telling her work stories in English, the more confident she became in speaking. She started to enjoy the process, and her vocabulary expanded as she described different aspects of her projects. Storytelling is also a great way to practice speaking fluently because it helps you focus on communication rather than perfection. When you tell a story, you naturally use phrases and expressions that are more common in conversation. You're not just focusing on grammar. You're thinking about how to make the listener interested and engaged. If you want to practice storytelling in English, here's a simple exercise. Pick a recent experience you had. This could be a trip, an event, or even something funny that happened at work. Tell the story in detail, focusing on the emotions and key moments. Practice adding more details as you get more comfortable. For example, describe the people involved, the weather, or the feelings you experienced during the event. The more you tell stories, the more natural your English will sound. You'll also start to use expressions and vocabulary that are more suited to real-life conversations, which will help you sound more like a native speaker. So, if you want to improve your fluency and feel more confident speaking, start telling stories in English. The more you practice, the better you'll get at expressing yourself, and soon enough, speaking English will feel like second nature. In the next part of this episode, we'll discuss another fun technique that will make your learning journey even more exciting. Now let's talk about a strategy that can really elevate your English skills: immersing yourself in the language. This doesn't just mean studying English, it means surrounding yourself with English in your everyday life, in ways that feel natural and fun. Let me share a story about Claire. Claire is a high school teacher who moved to an English-speaking country a few years ago. When she first arrived, she could understand English, but she struggled to speak fluently. Her work was in English, but her social life was mostly in her native language. She realized that despite working in English every day, she wasn't fully immersed in it. Claire decided to make a change. She started by watching English language movies and TV shows, especially those that used everyday language. She would watch with subtitles at first, but then tried watching without them to test her listening skills. Slowly, she began picking up phrases and expressions that were used in casual conversations. One day, Claire decided to try something a little more challenging. She started to follow social media accounts that posted content in English, things like Instagram pages about her hobbies, YouTube channels for education, and even Twitter feeds from native speakers. These accounts exposed her to real, spontaneous conversations that weren't scripted or formal. Claire also made a point of interacting with the content. For example, she would leave comments or share posts in English. At first, she was hesitant, but she soon realized that writing short messages was a great way to practice without feeling too much pressure. The more she engaged with English in her daily life, the more confident she felt speaking it. Another great way to immerse yourself is by listening to podcasts. Let me tell you about Alex, a software engineer who was struggling with conversational English. He would often understand English speakers, but when it was his turn to talk, he felt awkward. He didn't have enough practice with real conversations. Alex's breakthrough came when he started listening to podcasts on topics he was passionate about: technology, business, and even personal development. He didn't just listen to them passively. He would repeat sentences he found interesting and try to use the same intonation and rhythm as the speakers. This helped him understand the flow of natural speech and gave him phrases he could use in his own conversations. Immersion can also happen in the classroom. Let's look at Maria, who is a student studying engineering. In her English class, she felt like the lessons were too structured and not realistic enough. To immerse herself in English, Maria started reading articles and books related to her field of study in English. She realized that the more she read about engineering in English, the more technical vocabulary she picked up. And soon, she felt more confident talking about her field in English. Immersing yourself doesn't have to mean living in an English-speaking country, but it does require making English a part of your life every day. Here are a few ways you can immerse yourself. Watch TV shows and movies in English. Start with subtitles if you need them, then try to watch without. Listen to podcasts or audiobooks in English on topics that interest you. Follow social media accounts that post in English, and interact with the content by commenting or sharing. Read articles and books in English, especially on topics related to your work or hobbies. Immersion helps you absorb the language naturally. You'll start recognizing new words, understanding sentence structures, and using more natural expressions. Over time, it will feel less like studying and more like just living in the language. So, if you want to take your English skills to the next level, immerse yourself in the language as much as possible. The more you surround yourself with English, the faster you'll improve. And in the next part of this episode, we'll explore another technique that will help you speak with confidence and fluency. Let's dive into another powerful tool for improving your English: the power of repetition. This might sound simple, but it's incredibly effective when it comes to mastering the language. Repetition helps you internalize vocabulary, phrases, and grammatical structures until they become second nature. Let me share a story about Laura. Laura is an architect who often communicates with international clients in English. While her writing was impeccable, she struggled with spontaneous conversations. She noticed that she kept forgetting the same words and phrases during meetings. After speaking with a colleague, Laura realized that she wasn't repeating words enough to make them stick. To fix this, Laura started practicing repetition exercises. She would review key vocabulary from meetings and repeat it throughout the week. For example, if she learned the word blueprint in a meeting, she would use it in different contexts. During the day, like describing a project at work or talking about plans with friends. Laura also began to listen to conversations in English and repeat phrases she found interesting. She would pause a podcast, repeat what she heard, and then continue. This helped her to remember the vocabulary and improve her pronunciation. Over time, she felt more comfortable using these words naturally. Repetition isn't just for vocabulary, it's also great for grammar. Take Mark, a lawyer, as an example. Mark had studied English grammar for years, but he kept making the same mistakes, especially with verb tenses. One day he realized that instead of just studying grammar rules, he needed to practice using the I rules in real conversations. Mark started writing short sentences using the verb tenses he struggled with. For example, he wrote, "I have worked on this case for 2 months. I will speak with the client tomorrow." Every day, Mark reviewed these sentences and created new ones. He repeated them out loud, trying to incorporate them into his conversations at work. The more he practiced, the more confident he became with verb tenses. Let's talk about another example. Anna, a chef. Anna is great at cooking, but she struggled with talking about recipes in English. She would often forget key cooking terms and end up using the wrong words. To improve, Anna decided to repeat recipe instructions out loud as she cooked. For instance, while preparing a dish, she would say, "Now I'm going to sauté the onions until they're golden brown," or "The sauce needs to simmer for 15 minutes." By doing this every day, Anna became more confident and started using cooking vocabulary naturally in conversations. If you want to practice repetition, here are a few tips. Review new words or phrases regularly. Don't just learn them once, repeat them in different contexts. Practice speaking out loud. When you hear something useful, pause and repeat it. Use the language in daily situations. Whether it's at work or at home, find ways to use what you've learned as much as possible. Repetition makes learning feel effortless over time. It helps you become more familiar with the language until it becomes part of your natural speech. So, if you want to improve quickly, start repeating the things you learn. You'll soon notice the difference. In the next part of this episode, we'll explore another technique to help you build confidence and fluency. Let's talk about a method that can dramatically improve both your speaking and listening skills. Shadowing. Shadowing is an exercise where you repeat what you hear as closely as possible, mimicking the rhythm, intonation, and pronunciation of native speakers. It's a technique used by many language learners to sound more natural and fluent. Let me introduce you to Lily. Lily is a business consultant who works with international clients, and although she was good at reading and writing in English, she felt her spoken English was too stiff and formal. She noticed that she often hesitated during conversations, and her accent made her feel self-conscious. One day, Lily heard about the shadowing technique and decided to give it a try. She started by listening to a podcast episode she enjoyed and paused after each sentence. Then, she repeated the sentence aloud, trying to match the tone and pace of the speaker. For example, when the speaker said, "We need to find a solution that works for everyone," Lily repeated it exactly as she heard it. The more she practiced, the more natural her speech became. She also began to notice that she understood English conversations more easily. By mimicking native speakers, she trained her ear to pick up on subtle nuances in pronunciation, rhythm, and intonation. Another great example is Jack, a journalist who works in a multilingual newsroom. Jack had trouble understanding fast-paced English conversations during interviews. He decided to try shadowing the newscasters he admired. At first, it was difficult to keep up, but Jack stuck with it, repeating news broadcasts as soon as he heard them. He noticed that after a few weeks, he could follow along with the speed of the interviews much more easily. If you're wondering how to get started with shadowing, here's a simple guide. Choose content that interests you, whether it's podcasts, YouTube videos, or TV shows. Pick something that excites you so that it feels like a fun activity. Start with short segments. Listen to a short sentence or paragraph and try to repeat it as accurately as possible. Focus on pronunciation and rhythm. Don't just focus on the words. Pay attention to how the speaker emphasizes certain words or phrases, the pauses they take, and the natural flow of the sentence. Repeat regularly. Make shadowing a daily practice. The more you repeat, the more comfortable you'll get with the sounds and patterns of English. Shadowing is one of the best ways to improve your fluency because it helps you internalize the sounds and rhythms of the language. By mimicking native speakers, you'll gradually sound more natural in your conversations. Remember, it's not about perfection, it's about progress. So, if you want to improve your speaking and listening skills, start shadowing today. The more you practice, the more confident and fluent you'll become. In the next part of this episode, we'll talk about how you can use your mistakes as a powerful learning tool. Now, let's talk about something that might seem counterintuitive, but is actually one of the most important steps in mastering English: embracing your mistakes. It's easy to feel discouraged when you make mistakes, but in reality, mistakes are your friends in the learning process. They are proof that you're trying, that you're pushing your limits, and that you're learning and growing. Take Mike, for example. Mike works in customer service and communicates with English-speaking clients every day. At first, he felt really nervous when speaking English. He was constantly worried about making mistakes, so he would often avoid speaking altogether. If he didn't know the right word or phrase, he would stay quiet or switch to his native language. One day, after a particularly awkward conversation with a client, Mike realized that avoiding speaking wasn't helping him. Instead, he decided to change his mindset. He started viewing mistakes as a way to improve rather than something to fear. The next time he made a mistake, he would laugh it off and say something like, "Oops, that's not what I meant. Let me try again." Mike's new approach worked wonders. He began to speak more often and more confidently. When he made mistakes, he would learn from them and remember the correct words for next time. Over time, his fluency improved because he wasn't afraid to make mistakes. He was learning from them. It's not just Mike. We all make mistakes, especially when learning a new language. I remember when I first started learning English, I often confused words that sounded similar but had different meanings. For instance, I once said, "I'm interested to see you," when I meant to say, "I'm happy to see you." Instead of feeling embarrassed, I laughed and said, "Well, that's not exactly what I meant." My friends laughed with me, and I learned the difference. Making mistakes is not a sign of failure. It's a sign of progress. Think about it. Every time you make a mistake, you're one step closer to getting it right. Mistakes are a natural part of the learning process, and the more you embrace them, the more you'll improve. Let's look at another example. Sophia, a lawyer who works with international clients. Sophia was always very careful with her English, but she realized that this made her slow and hesitant when speaking. She didn't want to make any mistakes, so she often paused mid-sentence, overthinking everything she said. Sophia realized that the best way to get better was to speak without overanalyzing every word. She started speaking more freely, even if she wasn't 100% sure of her grammar. The result? She made a lot of mistakes at first, but her confidence skyrocketed. As she continued to practice, she began to make fewer mistakes and felt much more comfortable in her conversations. If you want to make the most of your mistakes, here's a helpful approach. Reframe mistakes as learning opportunities. Instead of seeing mistakes as failures, view them as valuable feedback. Don't fear correction. If someone corrects you, embrace it. It's a chance to learn and do better next time. Reflect on your mistakes. After a conversation or practice session, think about the mistakes you made and how you can improve. Laugh it off. Language learning is meant to be fun. Don't take your mistakes too seriously. By embracing mistakes, you'll stop holding yourself back and start speaking more freely. Remember, no one expects you to be perfect. The more mistakes you make, the more you'll learn. In the next part of this episode, we'll discuss the importance of consistency in your English practice. Stay tuned, and let's continue improving together. Let's move on to another key element in improving your English. Consistency. Consistency is the secret ingredient that can transform your language skills over time. It's not about practicing for hours every day, but rather about committing to practice regularly, even if it's just a little bit each day. Small, consistent efforts add up to big improvements. Take Julia, for example. Julia is a graphic designer who has been learning English for several years. In the beginning, she was excited and practiced a lot, but after a few months, she found herself getting busy with work and other responsibilities. She noticed that she was starting to forget the words and phrases she had learned, and her progress slowed down. Then, Julia made a simple change. She started practicing English for just 15 minutes every day. It wasn't a big commitment, but it made all the difference. She would listen to a short podcast during her commute or read a few paragraphs from an English book before bed. Slowly, those 15 minutes added up to a lot of practice, and her skills began to improve again. Another example is Ethan, a project manager who needed to improve his English for his job. He had learned English in school but wasn't using it regularly, so his skills had become rusty. Ethan realized that if he wanted to improve, he needed to make English a part of his daily routine. He started setting aside 20 minutes every morning to review new vocabulary and watch videos in English. Over time, he became more comfortable speaking at work and even began to participate in English language meetings. Consistency is important because it helps you stay engaged with the language. The more often you practice, the more the language becomes second nature to you. You start thinking in English, and it feels less like studying and more like living in the language. Now let's look at Hannah, a nurse who has been working in an English-speaking country for a year. Hannah had a strong command of medical vocabulary, but her general conversation skills were still lacking. She knew she needed to practice more, so she began to set a goal for herself. She would speak in English with her colleagues for at least 10 minutes every day, even if it was just small talk. At first, Hannah was nervous, but with each conversation, she gained more confidence. She also started listening to medical podcasts in English during her breaks, which helped her improve her listening skills. The more she practiced, the easier it became. Today, Hannah speaks with ease in both professional and casual settings. If you want to build consistency in your language practice, here are some tips. Set small, manageable goals. You don't need to spend hours on your English every day. Start with 10-20 minutes and make it a habit. Make practice part of your routine. Whether it's listening to a podcast while cooking or reading a book before bed, try to incorporate English into your daily life. Stay motivated. Celebrate your small wins along the way. If you've learned 5 new words today, be proud of that. Remember, progress takes time. It's not about being perfect right away, but about staying consistent in your efforts. Over time, you'll look back and see how far you've come. In the next part of this episode, we'll talk about how to use feedback to accelerate your progress. Keep listening. Now, let's discuss one of the most powerful tools you can use to accelerate your English learning: feedback. Feedback helps you identify areas where you need improvement and gives you a clear direction for your practice. Whether it comes from a teacher, a language partner, or even from yourself, feedback is crucial for making progress. Take Miguel, for example. Miguel works as a software engineer and often communicates with international colleagues in English. When he first started working, he was unsure about his language skills and often felt frustrated when things didn't go as smoothly as he hoped. He decided to seek feedback from his team members to get a better idea of where he could improve. At first, Miguel was nervous about asking for feedback. He didn't want to seem like he didn't know enough, but his colleagues were supportive. They pointed out areas where he could improve, like his pronunciation and sentence structure, and they gave him tips on how to improve. Miguel took their advice seriously and started focusing on these areas during his practice sessions. He also began recording himself speaking in English and listened to the recordings to identify mistakes. With time, he could hear the difference in his pronunciation and noticed that he was becoming more confident and clearer in his speech. By regularly asking for feedback and acting on it, Miguel was able to make rapid progress. Feedback isn't just about what others say, it's also about how you self-reflect on your learning. For instance, Lily, a teacher, was always trying to improve her English. She would record herself giving lessons in English and then listen to the recordings. By doing this, she could hear where she made mistakes and where she sounded more natural. She found this process incredibly useful because it allowed her to pinpoint exactly what needed to be worked on. One of the most helpful types of feedback comes from a language partner. Having someone to practice with can give you immediate corrections and suggestions. Sarah, a journalist, found a language partner online and started practicing English with her twice a week. Sarah's partner would give her feedback on her pronunciation and grammar, and Sarah would do the same for her partner. This exchange of feedback helped both of them improve their skills quickly. If you want to make the most of feedback, here are a few tips. Be open to constructive criticism. Feedback is meant to help you grow, not discourage you. Embrace it and use it to your advantage. Ask for specific feedback, instead of just asking, "How am I doing?" Try asking for feedback on specific areas, such as your pronunciation or sentence structure. Self-reflect regularly. Take time to listen to yourself. Speaking or review your writing. Identify areas where you can improve and focus your practice on those areas. Practice with a partner. Find a language partner who can give you feedback in real time. This will help you make faster progress. Feedback is an essential part of learning because it helps you stay on track and ensures you're improving in the right areas. The more feedback you receive, the better you'll understand your strengths and weaknesses. By acting on feedback, you can make your learning experience more focused and efficient. In the next part of this episode, we'll talk about setting realistic goals to help guide your practice. Stay tuned for more tips and strategies. Now, let's move on to an essential part of language learning, setting realistic goals. Setting goals gives you direction and motivation to keep improving. Without clear goals, it's easy to lose focus or become discouraged. But with the right goals, you'll have something to aim for and can track your progress more effectively. Take Emily, for example. Emily is a financial analyst who recently started learning English. At first, she didn't know where to begin. She wanted to improve her speaking, listening, and writing skills, but she was overwhelmed by the sheer amount of things she could work on. So she decided to set a few small, realistic goals to guide her learning. One of Emily's first goals was to learn 10 new vocabulary words every week. This goal was simple and achievable, and it gave her a clear focus. She used flashcards to learn new words and reviewed them every day. By the end of the month, Emily had learned 40 new words, which helped her feel more confident in conversations. Another goal Emily set was to watch one English language movie every week. She didn't try to understand everything at once. Instead, she focused on understanding the general meaning and picking up useful phrases. Over time, this helped her improve her listening skills and became a fun way to learn more about everyday conversations in English. The key with Emily's goals was that they were small and realistic. She didn't aim to be fluent in English overnight. Instead, she took it one step at a time. By breaking down her larger goal of fluency into smaller, manageable goals, she was able to track her progress and stay motivated. Now, let's talk about another example, Thomas. Thomas is a marketing professional who moved to an English-speaking country for work. His goal was to improve his English so that he could feel comfortable participating in meetings and presentations. However, he realized that if he tried to tackle everything at once, he would burn out. So Thomas decided to focus on one specific area at a time. For the first month, he set a goal to improve his pronunciation. He recorded himself speaking every day and compared his pronunciation to native speakers. After a month of focused practice, Thomas felt more confident in his pronunciation and set a new goal: to improve his ability to lead meetings in English. By setting small, focused goals and sticking to them, Thomas was able to make steady progress without feeling overwhelmed. His experience shows how important it is to break your bigger goals into smaller, achievable steps. If you want to set realistic goals for your own learning, here are some tips. Be specific instead of vague goals like get better at English. Set clear, measurable goals like learn 5 new words every day. Make your goals achievable. Set goals that you can realistically accomplish. If you set goals that are too big, you might get discouraged. Break big goals into smaller steps. If your ultimate goal is to be fluent, break it down into smaller tasks, like improving your listening or practicing pronunciation. Track your progress. Keep a journal or make a checklist to track how well you're doing. Celebrate small wins along the way. Setting realistic goals helps you stay motivated and gives you a clear roadmap to follow. By achieving small milestones, you'll build your confidence and see improvement over time. In the next part of this episode, we'll talk about how to stay motivated during your language learning journey. Don't go anywhere. There's more to come. Now let's dive into a topic that many learners struggle with: staying motivated. Motivation is crucial when learning a new language, but it can be challenging to maintain, especially when progress feels slow. The key is to find strategies that keep you engaged and excited about your learning journey. Let me share the story of Rachel, a student who has been learning English for over a year. Rachel started off very motivated, attending classes and practicing every day. But after a few months, she noticed that her progress seemed to slow down, and she felt discouraged. She had set high expectations for herself and felt frustrated when she didn't meet them as quickly as she'd hoped. Instead of giving up, Rachel decided to change her approach. She realized that her motivation was fading because she wasn't celebrating her small victories along the way. So, she started rewarding herself for completing small goals, like watching a movie in English without subtitles or having a conversation with a colleague in English. For example, after having a successful conversation in English, Rachel would treat herself to a favorite snack or take a break to watch her favorite show. These little rewards helped her stay motivated and reminded her that every step forward, no matter how small, was an achievement. Then there's Tom, a software engineer who was also learning English. Tom loved technology and decided to combine his passion with his language learning. He set a goal to read one tech article in English every week. Not only did this help him improve his vocabulary and reading skills, but it also kept him interested because he was reading about something he already enjoyed. By combining his love for technology with his goal to improve his English, Tom made learning fun and relevant to his daily life. He found that when you're passionate about the topic you're learning about, it makes the process much more enjoyable. Another way to stay motivated is to join a language learning community. Like many of you, Alex joined a group of people learning English through social media. Being part of a community helped Alex stay motivated because she could interact with other learners, share progress, and celebrate achievements together. She also found support from other people who were facing similar challenges, which made her feel less alone in the process. If you're trying to stay motivated, here are some strategies you can use. Set small, fun goals. Rather than focusing only on big milestones like fluency, set achievable, enjoyable goals that keep you motivated, like learning a new word every day or listening to your favorite music in English. Celebrate progress no matter how small. Reward yourself when you achieve something, even if it's just understanding a conversation better or using a new phrase in a sentence. Combine language learning with your passions. If you love movies, watch them in English. If you enjoy cooking, follow recipes in English. Making learning enjoyable is the key to staying motivated. Join a community. Find a language partner or join an online group where you can share progress, ask questions, and get support from others. Motivation can come and go, but by finding ways to stay engaged with the process, you'll keep moving forward even during tough times. Remember, it's not about being perfect or fast. It's about staying consistent and enjoying the journey. In the next part of this episode, we'll talk about how to make language practice a habit. Now that we've discussed how to stay motivated, let's talk about something equally important: making language practice a habit. Building a habit around your language learning makes it much easier to stay consistent. The more you practice regularly, the more natural the language becomes, and the less effort it takes to keep going. Take Liam's experience. Liam is a university student who decided to learn English in order to travel and study abroad. At first, he practiced English whenever he had time, but it wasn't enough to make significant progress. He would study for a few hours one week, then take a break for weeks at a time. His progress was inconsistent, and he found it hard to stay on track. Liam realized that if he wanted to see better results, he needed to make English practice a daily habit. So, he started small. He set a goal to practice English for just 15 minutes every day, at the same time each day. He used the first 5 minutes to review vocabulary, the next 5 minutes to listen to an English podcast, and the last 5 minutes to write a few sentences in English. By turning his practice into a routine, Liam was able to integrate English into his daily life. He didn't have to think about it. It simply became part of his day, just like brushing his teeth. Over time, he noticed significant improvements in his speaking, listening, and writing. Let's look at Maria's journey too. Maria works as a nurse and had always wanted to improve her English for better communication with patients and colleagues. However, like Liam, she struggled to find the time to study consistently. Instead of studying in long blocks, Maria decided to make small, everyday activities part of her practice. She began by setting a goal to listen to a podcast during her commute to work every morning. She didn't need to understand every word, but listening to the podcast helped her get used to the rhythm and tone of native speakers. Over time, she found that she was more comfortable in conversations, and her understanding of English medical terms improved as well. Another way to make language practice a habit is by combining it with something you already do. Daniel, a chef, loved to cook, so he decided to follow recipes in English. Every day, Daniel would pick a new recipe, read the instructions, and follow them in English. Not only did this improve his vocabulary, but it also helped him practice speaking and understanding common cooking terms in English. Here are some tips for turning language practice into a habit. Start small and be consistent. Start with just 10-15 minutes a day and gradually increase the time as it becomes a regular part of your routine. Find opportunities to practice throughout the day. Whether it's listening to English podcasts during your commute, reading a few pages of an English book before bed, or using language apps during lunch breaks. Combine learning with activities you enjoy, like watching movies in English, reading books, or cooking recipes in English. When learning is connected to things you already enjoy, it becomes easier to stick to. Make it a non-negotiable part of your day. Like any other important task, make sure your practice time is a priority. It becomes much easier to stay committed when it's part of your daily routine. The more you practice, the more natural it will feel, and eventually, you won't even have to think about it. Consistency is key to making language learning a part of your life. Remember, small daily efforts lead to big results. In the next segment of this episode, we'll explore some effective techniques for improving your listening and speaking skills. Stay tuned for more tips. Let's now focus on two essential skills when it comes to improving your English: listening and speaking. Many learners feel that their listening and speaking skills are the most difficult to improve, but with the right strategies, you can make noticeable progress. Let's start with listening. The key to improving your listening skills is to expose yourself to a variety of listening materials in English. This could be anything from podcasts to YouTube videos, audiobooks, or even English news channels. The more you listen to English, in different contexts, the better you'll become at understanding it. Take Ben's story. Ben is a high school teacher who was having difficulty understanding native English speakers in fast-paced conversations. He often felt lost during faculty meetings and found it hard to keep up with his colleagues. Ben knew he needed to practice listening, but he didn't know where to start. One day, Ben decided to begin listening to podcasts in English every morning while jogging. He didn't worry about understanding every single word. Instead, he focused on understanding the general meaning and context of what was being said. Over time, his brain began to pick up on the rhythms of English speech, and he became more comfortable with the flow of conversations. For instance, Ben began to notice certain phrases and expressions that came up frequently in everyday conversations. He realized that when native speakers use expressions like, "by the way," or "to be honest," it often signals a change in the topic or a shift in tone. Understanding these cues helped him follow conversations more easily. The great thing about listening is that you can do it anywhere. Whether you're commuting, exercising, or even doing household chores, you can use these moments to listen to English. The more you expose yourself to the language, the more natural it will become to understand different accents, speeds, and tones. Now let's talk about speaking. Speaking is often the skill that learners struggle with the most because it requires you to actively use the language. But don't worry, just like with listening, practice makes perfect. Here's the story of Olivia, a recent college graduate who wanted to improve her spoken English. Olivia often felt shy speaking with her colleagues at work because she was afraid of making mistakes. She felt self-conscious about her pronunciation and worried about her grammar. But she soon realized that the only way to improve her speaking skills was to practice regularly. Olivia decided to start by recording herself speaking. She would pick a topic, talk about it for a few minutes, and then listen to the recording. At first, she was critical of herself and noticed many mistakes. However, instead of getting discouraged, she used those mistakes as learning opportunities. She focused on the areas where she struggled and made a plan to improve. Olivia also started to find opportunities to speak with her colleagues in English, even if it was just small talk during lunch breaks. At first, these conversations felt awkward, but with practice, she gained more confidence. Eventually, Olivia realized that the more she spoke, the more fluent and natural she became. Here are some tips for improving your listening and speaking skills. Listen to different types of materials. Whether it's podcasts, movies, audiobooks, or news, expose yourself to a variety of listening experiences. Focus on understanding context. Don't worry about every single word. Try to understand the main ideas and important details. Practice speaking regularly. Record yourself speaking, participate in conversations, and find speaking opportunities as often as you can. Don't be afraid of mistakes. Mistakes are part of the learning process. Embrace them and use them as opportunities to improve. Use speaking apps or language partners. There are many apps that connect you with native speakers for practice. You can also find a language partner to practice conversations. Remember, listening and speaking are skills that improve over time. The more you practice, the more confident and comfortable you will become. In the next part of this episode, we'll discuss some effective methods for improving your reading and writing skills. Let's now shift our focus to another important area of language learning: reading and writing. While listening and speaking are crucial for communication, reading and writing are essential for developing a deeper understanding of the language and expanding your vocabulary. First, let's talk about reading. Reading in English is one of the best ways to improve your vocabulary, grammar, and comprehension. When you read regularly, you expose yourself to new words and phrases, and you get to see how they're used in context. Over time, this helps you internalize the language. Meet Claire, a university student who had trouble reading academic texts in English. She was studying for a degree in environmental science, and most of her textbooks and research papers were in English. At first, Claire found it overwhelming to read these texts because the vocabulary was complex, and she often struggled to understand the meaning. To improve, Claire decided to set a daily reading goal. She began reading 10 pages of her textbook each day, even if she didn't understand everything. Instead of trying to memorize every word, Claire focused on understanding the main points of the text. If she didn't understand a word, she would underline it and look it up later, making sure to keep a list of new vocabulary. In addition to her academic reading, Claire also started reading English novels and news articles. This helped her get used to different writing styles and made learning more enjoyable. Claire found that reading regularly not only improved her comprehension, but also helped her feel more confident in using new words in conversations and written assignments. For writing, let's look at Mark's experience. Mark is a lawyer who was determined to improve his writing skills in English. He realized that writing legal documents in English was challenging because of the complex sentence structures and legal terminology. Mark knew that practice was key to improvement, so he set aside time each day to write in English. At first, Mark started by writing short paragraphs on topics he was familiar with. He wrote about his daily routine, his favorite hobbies, and even his thoughts on current events. Writing in a journal helped him get used to organizing his ideas in English and improved his ability to express himself clearly. Over time, he expanded his writing tasks to include emails, reports, and case summaries. One of the strategies Mark used to improve his writing was to read his own writing aloud. This helped him catch any awkward phrasing or grammar mistakes. It also allowed him to hear how his writing sounded and gave him a chance to make corrections before finalizing the text. Here are some tips to help you improve your reading and writing skills. Read regularly, whether it's books, articles, or even social media posts in English. The more you read, the better you'll get at understanding different writing styles. Focus on understanding the main ideas. When reading, don't worry about understanding every single word. Focus on the big picture and try to get the general meaning. Keep a vocabulary list. Write down new words and phrases you encounter while reading, and make sure to review them regularly. Write every day, even if it's just a few sentences. Writing every day helps you improve your fluency and become more comfortable with sentence structure. Read your writing aloud. This will help you catch mistakes and improve your writing flow. It's also a great way to practice your pronunciation. Remember, the more you read and write in English, the more you'll improve. These skills are crucial for building a strong foundation in the language and for expressing yourself clearly. In the final part of this episode, we'll talk about some of the best resources and tools you can use to continue improving your English. As we approach the final part of today's episode, let's talk about resources and tools that can help you continue improving your English. Whether you're just starting out or already at an advanced level, the right resources can make a huge difference in your learning journey. Let's begin with language apps. Apps like Duolingo, Babbel, and Memrise are fantastic for building vocabulary, practicing grammar, and even improving listening skills. The great thing about these apps is that they offer short, interactive lessons, which make learning feel like a game. You can practice anywhere, anytime, and track your progress. For example, if you're on a bus or waiting for a friend, you can quickly complete a lesson and stay consistent with your practice. Sarah, a busy professional, started using Duolingo to practice English during her daily commute. She liked that. The lessons were short and focused on real-life situations. She was able to fit language practice into her busy schedule without feeling overwhelmed. After just a few months, Sarah noticed significant improvements in her vocabulary and confidence when speaking. Another great resource is podcasts. Listening to podcasts in English is an excellent way to improve your listening comprehension, and it's perfect for learning while multitasking. Whether you're interested in science, culture, history, or personal development, there's a podcast for you. Take Mike, a student studying engineering. He started listening to podcasts related to his field in English, and it helped him familiarize himself with technical terms in a real-world context. By doing this, Mike improved his ability to understand conversations at conferences and in meetings. He also learned how native speakers use specific terminology in his field, making it easier for him to communicate with international colleagues. Podcasts are especially useful because they often feature native speakers with various accents. This exposes you to different speaking styles and speeds, helping you develop a more rounded listening skill. If you want to improve both your listening and speaking skills, you should also consider using language exchange platforms. Websites like HelloTalk or Tandem connect you with native speakers who are learning your language. You can practice speaking with them through text, voice, or video calls, and they'll help you with your English in exchange. One of our listeners, Carla, used a language exchange platform to practice English with her new friend, Lucy, from London. Every week, Carla and Lucy would set up a video call to chat about their day-to-day lives. At first, Carla was nervous about making mistakes, but Lucy reassured her that practicing was the best way to improve. Over time, Carla became more confident speaking in English and improved her pronunciation. Another powerful tool for language learners is YouTube. There are countless channels dedicated to helping people learn English, and these channels offer a wide variety of videos, from grammar lessons to cultural insights. Watching English videos on YouTube allows you to see how language is used in everyday situations, which is incredibly helpful for improving your speaking skills. For instance, Tom, a college student, found that watching English tutorials on YouTube helped him understand how to structure his essays better. He also loved watching vlogs in English because they helped him learn how people naturally speak, especially when it comes to slang and informal phrases. Here are a few more resources that can support your English learning. Books. Reading books in English is a fantastic way to improve your vocabulary and comprehension. Start with simple books, and as your skills improve, move on to more complex texts. Language meetups. Join local or online language learning groups where you can practice English in real conversations with other learners. Online courses. There are many online platforms like Coursera and Udemy that offer English courses for all levels. These courses can provide structured lessons on grammar, pronunciation, and more. The key to success is to find resources that match your learning style and to use them regularly. Consistency is everything when it comes to improving your English. In my insight to the next episode, we'll talk about some common mistakes learners make and how to avoid them. Make sure to subscribe to the English Talk community so you don't miss it. As we wrap up today's episode, let's take a moment to talk about common mistakes that many English learners make, and more importantly, how you can avoid them. Understanding these mistakes can save you a lot of time and frustration, so let's dive into a few of the most common ones. One of the biggest mistakes learners make is focusing too much on grammar instead of communication. While grammar is important, it's easy to get caught up in trying to perfect every sentence. The truth is, communication is about getting your message across, even if it's not 100% grammatically perfect. If you're constantly worried about making mistakes, it can prevent you from speaking confidently. Take John's story. John is a graphic designer, and when he started speaking English at work, he was so focused on using perfect grammar that he often froze during conversations. He would stop mid-sentence to think about the right verb tense or word choice, which made him feel nervous and awkward. Eventually, John realized that his colleagues understood him just fine, even if his grammar wasn't perfect. He started to focus more on expressing his ideas clearly, and over time, he became much more confident in his speaking ability. Another common mistake is avoiding speaking because of fear of mistakes. Many learners are afraid of speaking in front of others because they don't want to make mistakes. However, the fear of making mistakes can hold you back from improving. Mistakes are a natural part of the learning process, and every mistake you make is an opportunity to learn. Take Emma, for example. Emma is a lawyer who had been learning English for several years, but was terrified of speaking in meetings. She was afraid that her accent or grammar would make her sound unprofessional. After a while, Emma realized that her fear was actually making her more self-conscious and less effective in her communication. She started practicing speaking with colleagues in informal settings, and gradually she gained more confidence. The more she spoke, the less she worried about making mistakes. Another mistake is relying too much on translation. Many learners think it's easier to translate words directly from their native language to English, but this approach can lead to errors. English, like any language, has its own set of expressions and sentence structures that don't always match up with your native language, Lucas. A software developer often found himself thinking in his native language and then translating it into English. This led to some strange-sounding sentences. For example, he would say things like, "I have a lot of work here," instead of the more natural, "I have a lot of work to do." Over time, Lucas worked on thinking directly in English rather than translating, and this helped him sound more natural when speaking. Let's talk about pronunciation as well. Many learners focus on vocabulary and grammar but overlook pronunciation. Clear pronunciation is essential for being understood, especially in professional or social settings. Mispronouncing words can lead to confusion or misunderstandings. For instance, think about Michael, an accountant who struggled with pronouncing certain English sounds. He would often be misunderstood by clients, especially when saying words with th or v sounds. Michael realized that practicing pronunciation was just as important as learning new vocabulary. He started listening closely to native speakers and imitating their pronunciation. Over time, his pronunciation improved, and his clients had no trouble understanding him. Here are a few more common mistakes and how to avoid them. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Mistakes are part of learning. Use them as opportunities to improve. Focus on communication over perfection. It's more important to get your message across than to worry about making everything grammatically perfect. Practice pronunciation regularly. Clear pronunciation helps you be understood. Practice with online resources or language exchange partners. Think in English. Try to avoid translating from your native language. Think in English and use the words and expressions that feel natural. Don't be afraid to ask for help. If you don't understand something, ask for clarification. It's better to ask than to guess and make mistakes. Remember, language learning is a journey, and it's completely normal to make mistakes along the way. The important thing is to keep practicing and stay motivated. The more you practice, the more progress you'll make. As we move forward in our language learning journey, let's talk about motivation and how to stay on track. Learning a new language can be challenging, and it's easy to lose motivation along the way. But with the right mindset and strategies, you can stay motivated and keep making progress. One of the best ways to stay motivated is by setting achievable goals. Setting clear and realistic goals gives you something to work towards and helps you measure your progress. Start with small, manageable goals, like learning 10 new words a week or practicing speaking for 10 minutes a day. As you achieve these goals, you'll gain confidence and momentum to keep going. Take Sophia, for example. Sophia was learning English because she wanted to travel to the United States for a study program. At first, she was overwhelmed by the idea of becoming fluent in English. But instead of focusing on the big picture, Sophia set smaller goals like improving her listening skills and learning useful phrases for travel. She practiced speaking with a language partner for 15 minutes a day and listened to English podcasts during her commute. By setting achievable goals, Sophia was able to stay motivated and saw consistent improvement in her skills. Another way to stay motivated is by finding activities you enjoy that involve English. If you're passionate about movies, watch films in English with subtitles. If you love music, listen to songs in English and try to understand the lyrics. Engaging with content that you love will make the learning process more enjoyable and less like a chore. For example, Carlos, a teacher, loved cooking and often watched cooking shows on YouTube in English. He found that by watching these videos, he not only learned new recipes, but also improved his understanding of cooking-related vocabulary. Watching content that interests you makes learning feel more natural and fun. Joining a community can also help keep you motivated. When you're part of a group, whether it's online or in person, you have a support system to keep you on track. You can share your progress, ask for help, and encourage others. That's exactly what we aim to create here at the English Talk. Community, a supportive environment where learners can connect, share their experiences, and keep improving together. Mia, a student from Brazil, joined an online English study group. At first, she was shy about speaking, but the group was so supportive that she felt comfortable practicing. They would have weekly discussions on various topics, and Mia found that practicing with others kept her motivated. The group's positive energy inspired her to keep learning, and soon she was more confident in her speaking skills. Celebrating small wins is another key to staying motivated. Whether it's mastering a new tense, having a conversation in English without hesitation, or understanding a podcast without subtitles, take time to celebrate your progress. Recognizing your achievements, no matter how small, will keep you motivated and remind you of how far you've come. For instance, Ivan, an IT professional, celebrated every milestone, from understanding a challenging business article to giving a short presentation in English at work. These small victories gave him the confidence to keep pushing forward. Remember, every step counts, and progress is progress, no matter how small. One more tip is to stay consistent. It's easy to get distracted or lose focus, but consistency is key to success. Even if it's just 10 minutes a day, make time for English practice every day. Over time, this consistency will lead to significant improvements. You don't have to practice for hours. Just stay consistent and keep building on your skills. Now let's talk about tracking your progress. Keeping track of your learning journey is not only motivating but also shows you how much you've accomplished. You can keep a language journal, write down new vocabulary, or even record yourself speaking to compare how much your pronunciation and fluency improve over time. Finally, always remind yourself of why you're learning English. Whether it's for career opportunities, travel, personal growth, or making new friends, keeping your reason in mind will help you stay focused and motivated. When things get tough, remember that your goal is within reach, and every step you take is one step closer to fluency. To wrap up today's episode, remember that motivation comes from within, but with the right strategies, you can keep that fire burning. Set achievable goals, find fun activities, join a community, celebrate your progress, and stay consistent. You've got this. As we dive into the next part of our language learning journey, let's talk about accent and pronunciation. Improving your accent doesn't mean you have to sound like a native speaker, but it does help to be understood clearly. Clear pronunciation is key to effective communication, especially in professional and social settings. One of the first things to focus on when improving your accent is the sounds of English. English has certain sounds that may not exist in your native language, and learning how to pronounce them correctly will make a huge difference. For example, English has several vowel sounds that can change the meaning of a word. Take ship and sheep. The only difference is the vowel sound, but they mean completely different things. Let's take an example from Luis, a graphic designer from Spain. Luis had difficulty with the thier sound, which doesn't exist in Spanish. He would pronounce words like think and that as sink and dat. His colleagues sometimes had trouble understanding him, especially in meetings. To improve, Luis worked on these sounds by listening closely to native speakers and practicing with tongue twisters. Over time, his pronunciation improved, and he felt more confident in his interactions at work. Another common challenge is the intonation of English. Intonation is the rise and fall of your voice when you speak. It plays a huge role in how your message is received. In English, the intonation can indicate whether you're asking a question, making a statement, or showing excitement. For example, if you say, "You're going to the store," with a flat intonation, it sounds like a simple statement. But if you say it with rising intonation, "You're going to the store," it sounds like a question. Take Lily, a teacher, who had trouble with intonation when she started teaching English. She would speak in a monotone voice, which made her lessons sound less engaging. Her students often found it hard to stay focused because they couldn't tell when she was asking a question or making a point. Lily worked with a language coach to practice intonation and stress. Soon, her students were more engaged, and her lessons became much more interactive. Now let's talk about word stress, which is also crucial for clear pronunciation. In English, some syllables in a word are stressed more than others. For example, in the word record, when it's used as a noun, the stress is on the first syllable, record. But when it's used as a verb, the stress is on the second syllable, record. Misplacing the stress can lead to misunderstandings, so it's important to learn the correct stress patterns. Tom, a software developer, had difficulty with word stress in his presentations. He would stress the wrong syllable in technical terms, making it harder for his audience to understand. To fix this, Tom listened to native speakers and paid attention to how they stressed certain words. He also practiced with flashcards, focusing on the stress patterns. As a result, his presentations became clearer, and his colleagues were able to follow his explanations with ease. To improve your accent, it's also helpful to shadow native speakers. Shadowing means listening to a native speaker and repeating what they say immediately after they say it, trying to mimic their pronunciation, rhythm, and intonation as closely as possible. This technique helps you get used to the natural flow of the language and can be incredibly effective in improving your accent. Jessica, a marketing manager, used shadowing to improve her speaking skills. She would listen to English podcasts and repeat what the hosts said. At first, it was challenging, but over time, Jessica noticed that her speaking became more natural, and her accent softened. She also became more comfortable with the rhythm of English, which made her sound more fluent. Another key tip is to record yourself speaking. It might feel a little awkward at first, but recording yourself can help you hear your pronunciation mistakes and track your progress. You can record yourself reading a passage or speaking about a topic, and then listen to it to identify areas for improvement. Over time, you'll be able to hear the changes and improvements in your accent. For example, Marco, a lawyer, used to have a strong accent that made it difficult for clients to understand him. He started recording himself and listening to his own voice. By doing this, he was able to catch words he mispronounced and fix them. After a few months, his accent became clearer, and his clients found it much easier to follow his presentations. Lastly, don't forget the importance of practice. Improving your accent takes time, and it requires regular practice. The more you practice, the more natural your pronunciation will become. Whether it's speaking with a language partner, repeating sentences, or practicing tongue twisters, make pronunciation practice a regular part of your learning routine. To sum up, improving your accent is about understanding the sounds, intonation, and stress patterns of English. It also involves practicing with native speakers, recording yourself, and staying consistent. Don't be discouraged if it takes time. Accent. Improvement is a gradual process, and with dedication, you'll get there. As we continue exploring the English language, let's dive into one of the most challenging but essential aspects of English: phrasal verbs. These little phrases can be tricky because they often have meanings that are different from the individual words. Understanding and using phrasal verbs can help you sound more natural and fluent in English, especially in casual conversations. A phrasal verb is made up of a verb and one or more particles, usually a preposition or an adverb. For example, give, up, look after, and run into are all common phrasal verbs. Each of these phrasal verbs has a unique meaning that you can't always figure out just by looking at the individual words. Let's explore how to use some of these phrasal verbs in real-life situations. Take Rachel, for example. Rachel is a manager at a marketing agency, and she was often frustrated by her lack of understanding when colleagues used phrasal verbs in meetings. One day, a colleague said, "We need to wrap up the presentation by 3 p.m. Rachel didn't quite understand what wrap up meant in this context, so she asked for clarification. Her colleague explained that it meant to finish or conclude the presentation. Rachel realized that she had missed a few key phrases during past meetings because she didn't fully understand phrasal verbs. So, she decided to make learning phrasal verbs a priority. She started keeping a notebook of new phrasal verbs she encountered, writing down their meanings and examples of how they were used. Over time, Rachel felt much more confident using phrasal verbs in her own conversations at work, and her communication improved significantly. Let's look at another example. Steve works as a software engineer, and during team meetings, he frequently hears phrases like look into and bring up. At first, Steve had trouble understanding them. For instance, when someone said, "We'll look into the issue and get back to you," Steve was confused. But after researching and practicing phrasal verbs, he learned that look into means to investigate or examine something. With this knowledge, he could follow the conversation more easily and contribute more effectively to the discussions. One of the challenges with phrasal verbs is that they often have multiple meanings depending on the context. For example, turn up can mean arrive, as in, she turned up late to the meeting, or it can mean increase, as in, can you turn up the volume? Understanding the context is key to knowing which meaning is being used. Let's take a look at Mia's story. Mia is a nurse, and she often hears the phrasal verb take over during her shifts. At first, she thought it meant to take something physically, but she soon learned that take over actually means to assume control or responsibility for something. One day, a senior nurse said, "I'll take over the patient's care now." Mia realized that take over in this context didn't refer to physical movement, but rather the responsibility of caring for the patient. As you can see, learning phrasal verbs can really enhance your understanding of everyday English. They're commonly used in both spoken and written communication, especially in casual conversations. If you want to sound more like a native speaker, mastering phrasal verbs is a great way to go. So how can you improve your understanding of phrasal verbs? Here are a few tips. Learn phrasal verbs in context. Instead of memorizing a list of phrasal verbs, try to learn them through sentences or stories. This way, you'll better understand how they're used naturally. Practice regularly. The more you practice using phrasal verbs, the more natural they'll feel. Try to use them in conversations, write sentences with them, or listen to native speakers using them. Group phrasal verbs by meaning. It can be helpful to group phrasal verbs by their meanings. For example, phrasal verbs related to movement, go ahead, move on, bring up, or communication, bring up, speak out, call off, can be studied together. Use flashcards. Create flashcards with phrasal verbs on one side and their meanings and examples on the other. Review them regularly to reinforce your learning. Listen to English podcasts, songs, and videos. Native speakers often use phrasal verbs, and listening to them will help you pick up new ones and see how they're used in real conversations. Let's now talk about a few common phrasal verbs that can be used in both professional and everyday situations. Catch up. This can mean to talk with someone after not seeing them for a while, or it can mean to finish tasks you haven't completed. For example, let's catch up later, or I need to catch up on my work. Set up, this means to organize or arrange something. For example, I need to set up a meeting with my team, or can you help me set up the projector? Go over, this means to review something or check it carefully. For example, let's go over the details before the presentation, or can you go over the report one more time? Hold off. This means to delay or postpone something. For example, let's hold off on making a decision until next week, or can you hold off on the email until I review it? Look forward to. This is a great way to express excitement or anticipation about something. For example, I'm really looking forward to our meeting tomorrow, or she's looking forward to the weekend. These are just a few examples, but there are so many more phrasal verbs out there. Remember, the key is to practice and use them in real-life conversations to get comfortable with them. As we wrap up today's episode, I want to emphasize one last point: the importance of listening to audio in English. Whether it's podcasts, audiobooks, or songs, listening to spoken English is one of the most effective ways to improve your comprehension and pronunciation. The more you listen, the more you'll start to pick up on the natural rhythm and flow of the language. Listening to English regularly helps you get familiar with common phrases, sentence structures, and the way native speakers express themselves. Plus, it helps you get used to different accents and speaking speeds, which is essential for understanding conversations in real-life situations. So, if you haven't already, make listening to English a part of your daily routine. It doesn't matter if it's just 10 or 15 minutes a day, every little bit counts. Take a moment to reflect on the stories we've shared today. Maybe you found yourself in similar situations where listening or speaking felt challenging. Or perhaps you've had moments where you were able to apply the advice and strategies we talked about. I'd love to hear about your experiences. Drop a comment below and share any moments when you felt frustrated or successful in your language learning journey. Your stories could inspire others who are going through the same challenges. Remember, improving your English skills takes time, but every step you take brings you closer to your goals. Whether you're focusing on your listening, pronunciation, or phrasal verbs, consistency is the key. Keep practicing, stay patient, and don't be afraid to make mistakes, because that's how we learn. If you found this episode helpful, please give us a like to let us know you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe to the English Talk community so you never miss an episode. By subscribing, you'll get notified every time we upload a new podcast full of tips, stories, and strategies to help you become more fluent in English. Thank you so much for being a part of our community. We're all in this together, and we're here to support you every step of the way. Keep practicing, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next episode.